My name is Henry Hamura. I work for a large law firm stationed in downtown Los Angeles. We've overseen some of the biggest, most controversial cases in the last 2 decades and have built quite a name for ourselves. I'm using a pseudonym because, as you will hear, this story is almost fantastical, too frightening to believe real. I don't want to ruin a career I've spent so much time and effort building just because some people don't want to believe the truth of what is out there. First, I just want to issue a warning. Never, ever play Kakura-san. No matter how innocent the internet or books make it sound, don't do it. This is a story of how my life changed forever and how I lost something so dear. Spirit boards come in all shapes and sizes, and various names as well. In the US, the most common one is the Ouija board. They are intended as a children's game, when really, they can unleash something so powerful and evil that it may never be bottled. Spirit boards are just a portal to the other side, a way for spirits to communicate directly with the living, and that spirit can be good or a total evil menace. According to my research, you can use just about anything as a spirit board. In my native country, we played a game called Kakura-san. With this game, you question the spirits about your future, and they will sometimes answer. Maybe not with the answer you're seeking. We would take a coin, place it on a paper with some words and numbers written on it, and the coin would slide across to answer your question. After you were finished, you were supposed to tell Kakura-san to go home and slide the coin over the red Torii symbol at the top of the paper, and then tear the paper into 48 pieces and burn it. Almost 30 years ago, my sibling and I started playing Kakura-san, and did so a dozen times or so before moving to America, without much more than a few funny responses from a fox spirit. The last time we played Kakura-san, my brother asked the spirit,
Kakura-san, will you move this coin?
The coin slid across the paper and repeated circles for a few seconds, then stopped.
Kakura-san, will I become rich and famous?
He asked. The coin slid slowly across the paper. The coin was pressing so hard against the paper that I thought it would tear, but we were barely pressing on it. Something else was doing it. It spelled out F-E-E-D. Then a pause. M-E. From behind us, somewhere in the dark, came a deep, guttural growl, like that of a hungry dog. We didn't own a dog. We knew this was not Kakura-san. It was never described to act like this or be threatening. Something else had come through the game. Running across the room to grab my father's lighter from his desk drawer, he set the paper on fire and dropped it into the sink to burn, then turned on the tap to drown out the flames. I realize his mistake now, something that I wish he would have done, and maybe it could have prevented everything that would come. He forgot to tell Kakura-san to go home before destroying the paper. He left it trapped in our world. A few weeks later, our father transferred his job with a car manufacturer to the US, and we moved to Seattle. At first, adjusting to the culture shock was overwhelming, but we had all taken English language classes in school, and that made it easier. I can remember the day that we went into a toy store, and we were shocked to see that there was a popular, wildly sold board game that was just like Kakura-san, the Ouija board. Our mother forbid us from buying it, saying it would only invite trouble, and she was unaware that we had played Kakura-san numerous times by then. My brother and I managed to sneak over to the store and bought the Ouija board later that week. Katsuro was the most eager to buy it, which was obvious. I asked him why.
Every night since the last time we played Kakura-san, I've had these nightmares. They're too real. Sometimes I think they actually happened to me. In those dreams, I'm lying in bed, and from the corner of my eye, could see a dark shadow beside me. I can hear it taking deep, gasping breaths, and the dripping of saliva, like it's starving. It speaks to me in a growl, demanding that I feed it.
I asked him, "Do you ask what it wants?" He paused for a moment, deep in thought, as we walked down the sidewalk back home.
No, I always wake up and I can't move for a long time. Sometimes, I swear it is standing beside my bed, like it's waiting for me to feed it, or to feed on me.
I could see the fear in his eyes and in his voice. I had no doubt that he was telling the truth. Maybe you're just dreaming, Katsuro. Dreams sometimes seem like they're real, but they're not. They're...
Dreams don't breathe into your ear while you're lying on your back, unable to scream or yell or do anything.
I could only hang my head in shame because I felt terrible for doubting my brother. I wanted to believe him. But who could really believe something so outrageous without seeing it yourself? Katsuro was never one to lie, and would practically break his neck to tell the truth. Okay, so what do you want to do with the Ouija board?
I want to speak to it, banish it back to hell, then burn that board. This time, we'll play by the rules. This time, it won't follow us.
He was dead serious, and had the bravery of someone far older than 12. Tears were streaming down his cheeks as he clenched his fists. His stride became faster and faster. That happened on Monday. Our parents would be out the following Friday to a dinner with some of Father's executives to welcome him to the USA, and they said they would be out for hours. I was in charge because I was the oldest at 15, and so I had to keep an eye on my siblings. Michiko was 14 at the time, and she was too preoccupied with the wonderment of American television. So Katsuro and I decided to leave her out of the plan. And we also felt like it was a favor to our only sister to leave her out of any chaos that might happen. I could read English well, but my siblings weren't so great. The Ouija board was in English, of course, so I would have to translate because Katsuro couldn't. We unboxed the game, reading the rules aloud. Never play alone. Check. Never play in a graveyard. Check. It made me double think if any were nearby, but I didn't believe there were. Never burn it. This one, Katsuro became frustrated.
Why not?
He cried, bemoaning. I don't know, Katsuro. It doesn't say. They're just the rules. I don't think it'd be a good idea to question them. Never leave the planchette on the board.
Why not?
He asked. I don't know. I suppose it would leave the doorway open. Stop questioning the rules and just listen.
Okay, fine.
Never ask it when you will die. And the last rule.
Don't forget to say goodbye. That's the one we forgot with Kokura-san.
Katsuro reminded me. Thunder was rolling outside, and it sounded remarkably close to the house. Then lightning crashed, casting the whole house in a bright light like a camera flash. Yes, Katsuro, let's not do that again. I put the rolls back into the box and slammed my palms on the table. If you so much as break any of these rules, I will not be to blame if something gets you.
I won't.
Good. Now, let's hurry before... That's when the lights went off. Katsuro flipped the light switch several times with no effect. I remember groaning with indignation and annoyance. What I hadn't noticed then, and what I wish I would have, was that Michiko never asked what happened, or even made a sound about the power going out. We would see why later.
No! Shut off the lights! It's onto our plan!
The fear was growing in his voice. Shut up, Katsuro! It's probably the storm. Get those candles that Mother keeps for emergencies. Hurry! Katsuro fetched the candles with an eagerness I rarely saw in him. He was at a running pace. I couldn't see him, but I heard him rummaging through the cabinets at a frantic pace, followed by the padding of his feet coming back down the hallway.
Got him.
Okay, I hope you didn't break anything, I said as I leered at him. Anyways, let's light them around the table so we can see the board better.
I wish the power was working.
His voice was quaking. I do too, but we have to wait for the power company to fix it. I struck a match, but it went out with an abrupt hiss. I thought that the match was just a dud, so I struck another, and the same thing happened. My annoyance was building at this point. I struck another, and another, and another. All of them snuffed out within a second of being lit. My brother found a stick lighter and tried that as well, but it did the same thing. There was no gust or blowing of the air conditioner that could cause that, since the power was out. Finally, after several attempts, the spirit allowed us to light our candles, as if it were mocking us. We began to play Kakura-san on the Ouija board. Katsuro went to the window by the dining room table and opened it. The ozone smell from the thunderstorm flooded the inside of the house, and the loud rumbling of thunder filled the house. We removed the planchette from the box and placed it at the bottom. After a few moments of hesitation, we both placed our hands on the planchette and started the game.
Kakura-san, Kakura-san, if you're there, please move this blanket.
My brother said, unsure if he was saying the words correctly. He pronounced it more like blanket, but I just shrugged and laughed. In case you haven't seen a Ouija board, a planchette is the triangular piece that players put their hands on, and is used by the spirits to point to the letters and numbers. Within an instant, it began spelling out H-U-N-G-R-Y.
What does it say, Henry?
It says, "It's hungry," I replied, almost crying in fear. I was not sure why I was afraid, but something about the way it jumped straight to its demands was blood-chilling. Did you move it? Did you?
No, I would never do that, Henry. I didn't.
I believed him, and I could feel the tightening grip of fear in my stomach. To the point Katsuro asked,
What do you want to eat?
The planchette moved. It moved with so much force that I remember having trouble keeping my fingers on it, just letting go to see if it would just move on its own. M-E-A-T. I nearly flung my hands off the planchette and ran out of the room. But I reminded myself that I was the older one, and I had to be strong for my little brother. I also wasn't sure what would happen to us if I did let go.
I will find you something.
Katsuro answered, nearly jumping from his chair. He was dashing toward the fridge. No! Don't give it what it wants! You'll make it... Ah! That was all I got out before a searing pain went down my back. A pain so strong that I found it hard to breathe. I fell to the floor, writhing in a sudden, screaming pain. Gasping, I moved my hand under my shirt. I winced as I touched the pained area and saw blood when I looked at it. Katsuro! Look at my back, please! He was digging through the refrigerator by then, almost ignoring me entirely. As he looked desperately for something to offer, he casually looked over his shoulder.
I'll be right there,
he said as he shut the fridge and came running over to me, his little arms carrying wrapped ground beef that he sat on the table. He looked at my back and gasped.
Henry, there are 3 long scratches going all the way down your back. What happened?
It was that spirit. It did that when I told you not to feed it. We're just going to make it stronger, Katsuro. We both made eye contact with the ground beef, but the packages were empty. There was no sign that the package had been cut, torn, or broken in any way whatsoever. Just empty packages. The planchette moved again. this time without us touching it. It moved with a jerky motion, like something didn't quite know what it was doing, or like a jerky movement of computer lag. N-E-X-T. Then it slid to a blank area and back to the board. B-L-O-O-D. Katsuro grabbed the planchette and threw it out the window as hard as his little arms could. When we turned back, it was back on the table, and on the word no. Then it began to spell Y-O-U-R-S. I moved the planchette to the word no, and then goodbye. But then it moved on its own back to the word no, and spelled the next word so fast that I could barely tell what it said. S-I-S-T-E-R. Michiko gave out a terrifying scream so loud that somebody would have called the police if they could have heard her over the storm. Katsuro and I rushed down the hallway to her room at the far right of the hallway. She was lying on her side under the blankets, facing the wall, still screaming. I rolled her over to examine her. Her eyes were shut as if she were in a deep sleep, but her mouth was shrieking in bloody terror. I shook her hard several times, calling her name, trying my best to wake her, but she just kept screaming. Her arms flopped from under the blankets over the side of the bed as I was shaking her, and I saw her wrist was slowly dripping blood onto the carpet. It wasn't slit on the artery or anything life-threatening, but pricked, like with a small knife, and was only bleeding a few drops at a time. I knew first aid, so I wrapped the wound with one of her clean socks from her dresser and told Katsuro we had to end this now. As we were leaving Michiko's room, the temperature in the entire house plummeted, which was unexplained since it was late summer and the air conditioning wasn't working due to the power outage. I noticed that my breath was coming out in a cloud. The lights began to flicker then, and I saw something standing at the end of the hallway. A pitch black figure, about 7 feet tall, nearly as high as the ceiling. It looked like a man, but it had long, skinny claws instead of hands, and a smile filled with pointed teeth. It was gone once the flickering stopped a few moments later. It was showing us what it was, and I knew that it was warning us to continue, or else. Katsuro and I sat down at the table, placed our hands on the board.
What can we do to make you go away?
The planchette moved to no, then goodbye. My brother sighed, but then gave a shriek of terror as he was jerked to the floor and dragged down the hallway by some invisible force. I jumped up, grabbed his hands, pulling with everything I had, but couldn't budge him. It was going straight for his closet. He kept screaming,
No! Please, no! Stop! Just stop!
as he was being forced down the hallway and inside his bedroom closet. From within the closet, I saw yellow eyes and a wide smile staring back at me. I grabbed onto Katsuro's hands, trying my best to stop it. But it was no use. The closet snapped shut with a hard, powerful slam. Katsuro went inside. Out of panic and desperation, I tried to open the closet door. After multiple attempts, the door finally opened. My brother was not inside. Inside, there were piles of styrofoam meat trays. All appeared to have been opened recently. I realized later that Katsuro had been spending his allowance on various kinds of meat for the thing. I also found another kakuri-san paper under some of the trays. I tore it into 48 pieces along with the Ouija board and burned them, and threw the ashes into the wind, thinking maybe that it'd summon him back. It didn't. He did not. It has been nearly 20 years since he went missing, and we filed that missing persons report. My parents assumed that he ran away to go back to Japan, The move had been hard on him, and he expressed his dislike for the move often. As for the meat trays, well, my parents and the police didn't mention the details or ask about it, if they just didn't notice them. For weeks, I searched for my brother, finding no trace of him. Sometimes I would sit in his closet, begging for an answer, but I'd get nothing. My parents grieved a long time, and their marriage dissolved as a result. Mother went back to Japan, while she allowed father to keep us in America, where I finished school and later became a lawyer. My father once convinced me to pay a private investigator to find Katsuro, but as you may guess, they found no trace of him. After I write this, there is a Ouija board on my dining room table. On the table, I also have some cheap ground beef, my brother's favorite toy, and something I have that I didn't 30 years ago. A vast knowledge of how to kill a demon.
The ratchet cranked in his busted hand, the knuckles on his right hand caked in dried blood and grease. Core's hand ached and was stiffened into the shape that holds the ratchet. He had been tightening bolts for hours, attaching the outer shell to the rocket. He had painted the entire rocket shell in blaze orange with a bright red lightning bolt down the sides, outlined in black. He had christened it The Bolt. "Core, come eat your damn dinner already," his wife yelled out the back door. He decided now was the time to quit for the day before her anger simmered into an explosive boil. The chilly nighttime air blew in through the open doors of the barn, but it did little to cool his overworked body. Finally, the last bolt was tightened. Core wiped his hands with an old rag as he stood back to admire his life's work. This was an old Ingold model TR-3B he found in a scrapyard 20 years ago. 20 years before that, it had most likely been the toy of a rich kid who used it to zoom to the moon and back to show off to his girlfriend. At 40 years old, Core was satisfied that it was ready for a test flight, but he wasn't going to tell his wife. Stiff-legged and exhausted, Core shuffled his way inside and hastily ate his dinner, took a shower, and collapsed into bed. At night, he dreamed of the burning excitement he had longed for. He had completed the safety checks and climbed into the cockpit. He flipped the switch to activate the power, then the switch to prime the thruster. As it heated up, he started the engine and heard it roar to life. The loud whining of the jet engine was growing, as if the rocket were dying for its first flight in those long 40 years. "Core, wake the hell up. All you want to do is sleep anymore. The crows need to be fed, the chicken eggs need to be collected, and the horse needs to be brushed. I need you to do all of this before you start tinkering with that toy." So close. His wife had interrupted yet another glorious dream of escaping from this never-ending hell. 20 years ago, when he bought the rocket, he still loved his wife dearly. She was happy, beautiful, and still as vibrant as the sun. Now, she was nearly always angry with him. Her beauty had faded into a constant grimace, and she was always finding a way to boss him around. All of those things had completely removed any feelings of affection he had for her. Core grabbed a clean pair of overalls and headed toward the back door to start his chores. "Now listen, Core, I'm going to my mother's for the weekend. I might even stay a week, I don't know yet. I just need to get away from this place for a while." "Me too," he thought. "Okay, dear," he replied instead as he turned around to trudge towards the animals. He was in the middle of collecting the chicken eggs when it dawned on him. Now's my chance. There were nice places on the moon in those days. It had been 50 years since the first city had been founded. It was completely enclosed in a dome, fed by massive oxygen tanks that were refilled weekly from shipments that came from Earth. Now, there are 10 more cities. Core was always seeing jobs listed in ads saying that there were some nice retirement communities up there with a great view of the Earth. Hell, he even seen factory jobs offering a complimentary apartment to live in on company property. Anything would be better than being stuck in a life with a wife who obviously didn't love him anymore. Core toiled for a few hours before he finished his chores. He dashed inside the house. In his closet, he found an old suitcase that hadn't been used since their first vacation to Bermuda 36 years before. The dust was so thick, it had to be wiped off with a sleeve. Inside, he found an old picture of them on that trip. A young, happy, content, and able-bodied couple embracing each other with grins as wide as their faces. Time isn't fair, he thought. He sat the photo on the bed and packed a week's worth of clothes. About a year ago, he had driven down to the courthouse to get the documents necessary to file for divorce. Core tried to work up the nerve, but he was so afraid of his wife that he never could work the nerve up to do it. He had already signed his part, the ink had long dried, along with a few fresh tears, and he left the rest on the bed for her to complete. Outside, Core climbed onto his tractor to pull the rocket out of the barn toward a concrete pad that he had placed in the middle of his field just for this purpose a long time ago. In the barn, he retrieved the ladder. He was going to use it to climb into the cockpit and the suit he had bought from the junkyard that was in near mint condition. Core evaluated the oxygen tanks to make sure that he could breathe in the suit. He also checked that the suit had no holes. At the rocket, he ran over a safety checklist on a clipboard, flying through it with gleeful excitement that a child might have on their way to a theme park. Check, check, and more checks. He could barely contain his excitement. Core dashed up the ladder, nearly tripping twice on the way up. He had spent a long time fixing the cockpit. It had taken him over a decade to collect all the necessary parts from the scrappers and the parts dealers online. After all his efforts, it looked brand spanking new. He had spent the last week polishing and refining all the buttons, screens, and coverings. He had also vigorously assessed each dial, sensor, and knob. The rocket radiated with the infamous new car smell. His grin stretched from ear to ear. The seatbelt snapped with a crisp click. The straps tightened perfectly. He flipped the switch to turn on the power and switched to prime the thruster. The engine roared to life. It was even better than his dream. The vibrations made the floor hum with life. From his position, he could see the approaching evening sky. The moon had already appeared, as if greeting him. While he was tending to the animals, he had looked up the evening's best time to launch for his area. It would arrive in 3 minutes. He was digging through his bag to double-check that he had brought all the necessary documents to immigrate to the moon, and found that he had accidentally packed the picture of him and his wife from all those years ago in Bermuda. He unbuckled from his seat, staring at it for several moments, remembering the good times they had. No, he thought, this is my old life. He tossed the old photo out the door. It fluttered down to the ground, landing below the thrusters on the launch pad. This is Delta 242839er. Am I clear to launch? Core said into his radio to the FAA. Roger that, you are clear for takeoff, the attendant replied. Roger. Launching in T-minus 30 seconds. Roger that, Delta 243839er. He flipped a switch to ignite the flames of the thruster, which would build up the pressure needed to launch. T-minus 10, he yelled as he set coordinates in his guidance system. 0. He flipped the final switch. His thrusters roared to life. Core was yanked back in his seat with such force that it slammed his teeth together in a painful wave. Soon, he was almost out to the troposphere. The rocket jerked as he entered the stratosphere, then the mesosphere. About halfway through the mesosphere, the rocket began to rattle violently, so much that he could barely keep his hands on the controls. Nothing Core had read said that this was normal. He began to panic. He debated if he should abandon the flight and turn around immediately. But he was so close. Just one more layer before he was free. Could he last just a few more agonizing minutes? Core decided to persevere. This old relic was tough. He spent so much time on it that it was basically brand new again. The cockpit began to get extremely hot, baking him like a sauna. Sweat poured down his face into his eyes. At first he thought it was just his nerves, then he realized his soles were starting to get hot as well. Something was going very wrong. Flames erupted from the engine compartment into the cockpit from underneath. His seat began to melt underneath him. The nearly mint-conditioned suit began to melt to his skin. The pain was unbearably excruciating. He cried out in agony as he frantically tried to reach for the eject button. But he realized that the shaking rocket and the G-forces made it impossible for him to reach it. For some reason, at that moment, all he could think of was his wife. He thought of them in their younger days, of that trip to Bermuda, of the ocean waves lapping over his feet as they sipped fruity drinks at that nice resort. The sun warmed and tanned his young skin. The love they made in the hotel every single night as the moon shone through the open blinds. He almost wanted to smile. The explosion killed him instantly.
As a society, we take many things for granted. A warm bed to sleep in, food to eat, and a safe place to call our home. In an instant, any or all of those things could disappear. Sure, we could have a job and pay for all of those things, and a gun or 20 to make ourselves feel safe. But how easy could it be to upheave all that sense of safety and security? The short answer is extremely easy. I live with my wife, Janie. We have a 2-year-old daughter named Sasha. We reside in what is considered a well-to-do and safe neighborhood. I work as a corporate manager for a large lumber and mining company that operates in the Midwest United States and Lower Canada. Our house sits about 500 feet from the street, and the street takes about 5 miles to get into the city of La Crosse in southwest Wisconsin. I had the house built a few years ago after I took over the company from my father when health issues prevented him from doing his duties. The house sits a short distance into the woods, and because we live in such a remote area, we tend to forget to lock the doors sometimes, but we haven't ever been too concerned. Last night, a knock came at the door. Now, it's not too uncommon for a salesperson to randomly knock on our door. It's a bit of a hike up here, but most people know about the house and it's easy to spot from the street. It's a bit of a hike up the driveway, but some of the more determined salespeople come up here. I opened it and saw a young guy dressed in a cheap, white button-up shirt and a generic black tie. Oh great, a Mormon, I thought. Good evening, sir. I am Jake from the AmeriSecure Company, here to offer you a special today. We have these new doorbell cameras that have been flying off the shelves. Today I can sell you... No thanks, we're fine. Have a good night. I said to the guy, annoyed that he was selling me some security junk I thought I didn't need. I tried to shut the door hard enough to show him that he wasn't welcome back, but he stuck his foot in the way. Sir, I don't think you heard me correctly, he said as he fumbled something out of his pocket. A pistol. You really should invest in some security, sir. He was grinning as I backed up into the house. I saw 2 more men emerge from behind our hedges. one carrying a shotgun, and the other had a pistol just like the first guy. The other guys had black ski masks, while this guy didn't. I guess he didn't care to be identified, or he didn't intend on us staying alive to report him. Just like I said before, it only takes a few seconds for your sense of security to shatter like thin glass. My wife was watching TV during the whole altercation, but she only turned around after seeing multiple people come through the door. I dove for the table that sat a few feet from the door. In the drawer, I kept a 9mm pistol, but the drawer was locked. I was hoping to knock it over and break it open, but it didn't happen. The salesperson and the guy with the shotgun started kicking and stomping me.
What's going on?
Was all she managed. The pistol guy rushed over and grabbed her by her hair, dragging her to the floor while she screamed and cursed. They forced us all to the walk-in closet. The salesperson dug through my pockets until he found my wallet and pocketed it. Janie clawed and punched at the pistol guy, who pistol whipped her with so much force, she went out cold, blood trickling from the back of her head. I had waited and waited for a chance to knock out the salesperson guy and take his gun. I saw my chance when she attacked, but I fumbled and he launched his fist into my nose, blood spilling down my face and onto my clothes. I threw a right hook at him, missing his nose but got him in the ear. He put me in a headlock after that. The pistol guy threw Janie in the closet. Then I was shoved in by the scrawny salesperson who was very pissed.
Goddamn piece of shit! Fuck!
He screamed as I saw him rubbing the ear I struck. He slammed the door shut. I panicked when I realized my cell phone was left on the arm of the couch. I searched Janie's pockets and couldn't find hers either. More panic. That was when I heard it.
Mommy?
Oh shit. Sasha is awake, I thought to myself, almost yelling it. Sasha shrieked. I thought for sure one of them would hurt her. But instead, the closet door opened and the shotgun guy tossed her in, arms extended. I caught her.
Daddy, who are they? Are they going to hurt us?
That was when something dawned on me. We were going to be fine. No, baby. We're gonna be safe. Grandpa George is here.
Is it that time?
Yes, baby. It's that time. We could hear them fumbling around rooms, knocking things about, and making a ton of racket. From the basement below us, I could hear her stirring. He is awake. I thought of a way to get into the kitchen to open the door to the basement, but I didn't want to risk the lives of my family that way. Instead, I had another plan. After several minutes of messing up the house, the salesperson guy opened the door, pistol drawn.
Where do you keep your valuables? Tell me now, or I swear to God!
The frustration was clear in his face and his voice.
The basement. They're in a safe in the basement. What's the combination? Tell me now!
The gun was waving back and forth as he yelled. This guy was unhinged, and it terrified me. He could slip and pull the trigger, and my daughter, or I, or both of us, would be victims of yet another senseless crime.
4, 16, 9, 27, 5, 12.
I really did have a safe with a combination close to that, but they'd never survive long enough to find it.
How do you get in the basement? That goddamn door?
He was talking about the steel door that went into the basement. It's secured with a 6-foot-long, 6-inch thick bar of steel and a dial to unlock it. Why all the security, you ask? Partially due to our safes being down there, but also to keep Grandpa George at bay. I could hear them struggling to lift the bar. It does weigh about 200 pounds, give or take. It thumped to the floor with a loud bang. I heard the growling coming from the basement. He was ready. The burglars descended the staircase. There's a switch at the bottom of the stairs to turn the lights on, but they'd have to survive first.
Holy fucking shit! What the fuck?
One of them exclaimed. Then I heard the shotgun blast. A guttural scream filled the basement and up the stairs to fill the rest of the house. It was followed by the sound of flesh being torn apart and blood pouring onto the floor. The other two men banged up the stairs to the door, trying to escape.
Shit!
I heard one of the men exclaim loudly as Grandpa George caught him on the stairs and ripped him to shreds also. Somehow, he caught the other one and threw him to the bottom of the steps onto the concrete floor, probably breaking his arms, judging by how I found him later.
No! Please! No! Please stop!
I knew that one was the salesperson. He had apparently been too stunned by fear to make it out of the basement. I was glad that Grandpa George had killed him too, but part of me was terrified. He had given the disease to one of my uncles, and he turned on his family not long after that. I held Sasha as she cried from fear. Shh, it's okay, baby. Grandpa George won't hurt us.
Promise?
Instead of responding, I kissed her forehead and rocked her back and forth, holding her tight in my arms. The sound of Grandpa George tearing the men apart, devouring their meat and cracking their bones, was enough to terrify the strongest man. As we had learned over the years, lycanthropy didn't stop him from attacking family. To explain Grandpa George, he had come back from Vietnam a changed man, more than you'd expect. Once a month, he'd disappear and come back within a few days. My grandma assumed he was cheating on her and confronted him one day. He denied cheating and tried to explain it, but he didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. She decided it would be best to take his keys and lock him in the workshop outside the house. That night, Grandma discovered his secret. Grandpa eventually devoted his life to trying to find a cure. He pored over old books and the internet, once that came around, but no such luck. He did make a fortune after helping a friend of his start up a small lumber company, which grew and grew and expanded into mining. Specifically, a silver mine. I took ownership of the company from my father several years ago after he came down with lycanthropy himself. You can guess how he got it. The cement in the basement walls is infused with flakes of silver, as well as the steel door. I built the basement room for Grandpa George to keep him safe. All of us safe, and the public safe when the full moon comes. Grandpa George always goes down there willingly. And we even threw in 30 pounds of beef to satisfy his hunger. On this occasion, I decided it was best to let the beast have his fun. I opened the door to go into the living room to get my phone. But at the last second, I decided to grab Sasha and made sure to shut the closet door and keep Janie hidden from sight. We ran outside, making a beeline for a small cabin I had about a mile into the woods. In that cabin, I had a shotgun loaded with silver bullets. I also had one in the house, but it was upstairs, and you must walk past the kitchen to get to the stairs. So that was out of the question.
Daddy, where are we going?
She asked me, her voice trembling with fear. To the cabin, baby. We'll stay there until morning.
But why? I thought Grandpa George wouldn't hurt us.
It's for our safety. We'll be fine, I said as I huffed from my fast pace up the mountain. We were a good distance up the trail when he pounced onto the road from the thick section of undergrowth. His face was in a snarl. Foam and blood coated most of his face. But through those, I saw the dark green eyes that I had got from him, and so did Sasha. I froze. We kept eye contact for what felt like forever, and then he just slowly turned and dashed back into the woods. I didn't hesitate to bolt off toward the cabin. We got inside. I threw the steel cages over all the windows and bars over the door, then grabbed the shotgun mounted on the wall. I called the police earlier the next morning. Actually, this morning. I had been awake the entire night out of terror for our lives, so I had plenty of time to think of a story about what happened to the burglars. My best thought was to go to the basement door and lock it and slide the panel over the door to hide it. We told the police that some thugs broke in, beat up my wife, and took my wallet. Then they messed up the house after locking us in the closet. And finally, the burglars just left. After the police left, I threw what remained of their bodies into a giant garbage disposal we have in the basement for the beef scraps after we clean up from Grandpa George's monthly transformation. The machine chewed up their bones and meat like nothing, and I dumped the remains into a garbage bag. We usually take the shredded beef scraps to the compost bin to use in our garden, but that's too risky with this. I suppose I'll be making a trip to an undisclosed lake within the next few days to feed the fish. I found Grandpa George asleep in his bed. He looked exhausted, so I left him alone. He's never been a fan of hearing about what he did in his wolf form, because he always called it his biggest shame. I thought you should all know that there is a werewolf who lives outside La Crosse, Wisconsin. If he managed to escape and hurt someone, I would feel responsible. This is your warning. If you're ever laying in your bed and hear a wolf howling outside somewhere, and something just sounds a bit off, it may just be another roaming timber wolf. Or it's Grandpa George. It was a cloudless, sapphire blue sky that day. We had the camping trip planned for months, and it took even longer than that for us to coordinate our vacations so that we could all be there together. It was a reunion I had dreamed of for so long. In high school, we were inseparable. Our weekends consisted of booze and easy girls. After college and getting married, my weekends consisted of sitting at home drinking alone, and maybe a date with my wife. Exciting stuff, right? Well, that's how it was for years, until the camping trip. These days, I spend a lot of time with my therapist and a lot more time dwelling on what I could have done to prevent all of this. Survivor guilt's a bitch. I'm writing down this sad, horrible story in hopes that maybe if I tell it, then I won't feel so crazy and that, hopefully, it will relieve the guilt. I spoke to Ron and he wanted to carpool in his new SUV.
It's the newest and greatest. Or at least that's what the salesman told me.
He laughed.
It has different modes for sand, snow, mud, and rain. So if we're stuck in the desert, covered in snow, mud, and a downpour starts, we'll be all set.
He could always make me laugh. That sharp wit of his hadn't dulled in 12 years since high school. Ron wasn't the most athletic guy, but he could slay a room with his humor. We had grown up next door to each other from the time we were born until the painful time of leaving home. bound for different colleges. Ron was off to major in business, while I was going to major in accounting. Thanks to him, I was the smartest jock in school, and I have him to thank for my career now. The trip to the camping spot in Northeast Oregon was going to be a 5-hour trip for us, so I told him we would switch halfway.
No way, man. You were always driving me around in that chick magnet Charger in high school. I owe you at least 600 hours of chauffeuring.
All right, Ron. Whatever you say. Just don't kill us.
I didn't want to tell you this, but your wife told me she was sick of your shit, and she'd split the life insurance if I killed you out here.
Yeah, okay, Ron. Like she'd ever talk to a lowly nerd like you.
Didn't I tell you about the affair?
It was like that for the entire 5-hour drive. Him tossing one inside joke after another. I could have done that for the rest of my life and been happy. God, it's so painful to think about. I'll cherish that trip for the rest of my life. The cabin and the property belonged to Andrew and his family. The property itself was 50 acres and was situated nicely by a beautiful lake. If you're thinking, damn, they must be rich, you're correct. Andrew rolled up in his new Ford Raptor, which I was convinced he had bought for the occasion just because he could. Sup, guys? Long time no see. He greeted Ron and me as he looked 2 rifle bags from his truck. Got these babies on special back in town. Thought maybe we'd shoot a deer and have some fresh meat for the weekend. I laughed. You gonna dress it yourself? I'm not, nor do I know how.
The only thing Andrew knows how to dress is himself.
Ron quipped. I see you haven't changed. Andrew said, laughing. He went inside and hung his rifles on the mount in the living room. We chilled on his super comfortable couches and watched TV until the others arrived. Howard and Mark showed up about an hour later. They said the wreck had postponed them. Ron laughed and said,
Luckily, the wreck didn't postpone our drinking.
Pointing at the 4 empty beer cans set beside each of us. After we drank a few more beers, dusk approached. I remember the sky being painted perfect shades of orange and yellow, with a hint of purple. Laying back in the comfortable deck chair by the lake as the sun sank below the mountains was the most relaxing time I'd had in years. No worries about life, work, or anything else. I'd give anything to go back. As I was basking in the beauty of the sunset, Mark came strolling through the French doors, fishing rods in hand. Anybody down for some fishing? He had a grin spread across his face. Fishing was always Mark's favorite hobby, and he was remarkably lucky at it. Somehow, in some way, he managed to catch more fish than any of us. I thought about it and agreed to come along, and so did everyone else. We fished for the rest of the evening. It felt as if every 10 minutes Mark was reeling in another one. I just sat there, tossing back beers, because I always have shit luck with fishing. On the far end of the lake, I saw a couple of deer wandering around, not even seeming to care about us. I considered the idea of going hunting the next day like Andrew asked, but that never happened. At some point that night, old age set in, and we decided it was time to turn in for the night. Ron, Mark, Andrew, and I watched old wrestling matches until we fell asleep, one by one. Howard, being the one who always caved first, was in bed before we were done fishing. In the old days, he would have woken up with some Picasso-level drawings on his face. The next morning, we grabbed all of our camping gear and hiked up the mountainside to the spot that Andrew suggested. I came up here a few days after we made the plans and cleared a nice spot that my family used years ago. It's fantastic. Lots of tree cover and shelter from the rain, a direct view of the lake, and it's not very far from the cabin either. The weather that night was predicted to be perfect by the local meteorologist.
Look out, folks. Tonight will be clear skies for good times on this balmy mid-July day. Today's high is 92, expected to drop to 79 by dusk.
We worked together setting up all the tents and getting the fire rolling in the nice little pit that Andrew's family had made. I saw Andrew standing by the entrance of the trail, looking around as if inspecting something.
What do you all think of a hike? The path looks like it's still in decent shape.
Andrew said as he inspected it from below.
Well, I brought a machete just in case we came across some thick hedges that needed clearing. Or some sexually aroused camp counselors.
Ron joked.
Calm down, Voorhees. There ain't any of those here. Just sexually deprived early 30s men with receding hairlines.
Howard retorted.
Speak for yourself. I still have a full head of luscious hair and luscious babes at my disposal.
Andrew teased as he combed his long hair back with his fingers.
I wish I had thought of this trail when I was up here before.
Hair plugs and inflatable dolls. Now let's get on this hike.
Ron said as he walked by Andrew, as we all died laughing. He drew the machete from his hip and marched ahead, acting like an English explorer cutting through the Congo. The trail was terrible. We only had to pause a few times to cut through overgrown foliage, and there was a part that had washed down the hillside that we had to navigate carefully. We reached the top after an hour, and I will admit that I was pouring sweat by then. The other guys were in about the same shape as me, except Ron, who looked to be on the verge of death, and Andrew, who stayed fit over the years. At the top of the mountain, there was a large stone formation that appeared to be an altar, with a stack of stones in the center, measuring about 12 feet high.
My parents said the realtor told them it was built by the Nez Perce and was used to make offerings to their gods. Not blood or human sacrifices, but probably baskets of food and such.
Andrew educated us.
Uh-huh,
I responded out of breath. The other guys were chugging water and looking for shade.
If that's true, then this would be protected by something.
We rested at the mountaintop for a while. We made phone calls, texts, social media updates, etc., as this was the only place that had cell service. After a long, much-needed break, we made our way back down the path. About halfway down, Mark started yelling that he had seen a bear.
I swear to God, Andrew, it was right there in the clearing. It was right behind those pines. You're losing it, Mark. I've never seen a black bear around here.
Andrew replied to him.
Doesn't mean they aren't here. I don't want to be a bear's lunch. Can we just wait and see if it shows again? Sure, man. Whatever makes you feel better,
Andrew said.
Maybe I should have brought one of those rifles from the cabin. That would have been nice, Andrew,
said Mark, who was very distraught by then. He was visibly shaking, and he had a terrified look on his face. It took him half an hour to calm down enough for us to continue back down to the campsite. Once we got there, we were shocked. Andrew and Howard's tent were torn to shreds, and all our possessions were scattered around the campsite, and some were even in the woods. Pissed off and tired, we cleaned up the mess. It was dark by the time we had finished, and we decided it wasn't safe to trek back down the mountain to the cabin. My tent had enough room for 2 people, so I told Howard he could share mine. Mark said that he had to take a piss while we were cleaning, and after we were done, he still wasn't back.
Maybe he got the runs,
suggested Ron. No, I don't think that's it. Something feels wrong, I said. Let's go find him.
Man, after all this walking, and we gotta go babysit Mark?
Ron complained. We searched through the trees and bush for what felt like hours with flashlights, but we couldn't find him. He never responded to our calls, and we never found a trace of him. The only thing we found were some old tire tracks on a narrow path and heard an ATV in the distance, which wasn't uncommon for that area, so I didn't think much of it. On our way back to the camp, most of us were a mixture of aggravated and worried. Mark wasn't one to pull pranks like that. Not even Ron would take it that far. Ron seemed to be especially annoyed. He ranted the whole way back. Just outside the campsite, Ron was in the middle of a fiery spiel.
That son of a bitch. He better not.
He hit the ground with a thud and didn't move. It took my brain a few seconds to notice the arrow sticking out of his right eye. "Oh shit, what the fuck?" I remember yelling. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and I ran for my tent and dove in. I could hear Howard howling outside my tent. My instincts told me to stay inside and not to move, but I had to check on my friend. Throwing my instincts aside, I peeped out and saw him on the ground where Ron died, grabbing at his bloody ankle. A wooden spike was jammed into his ankle, wrapped in a homemade trap that looked like a small cage. He was lying on his back, screaming. Then a gun fired and erased half of his face. The other guys were still scrambling around outside when that happened. We froze in our positions for a few seconds. Then everybody scattered. That was the last time I saw them. That's one of the hardest parts of this story. My last memory of them alive is us scattering in a frenzy. In my panic, I forgot my flashlight, and the path I ran down blended in with the forest in the darkness. In the dark, I thought I had found the right path to the cabin, but I found myself stumbling around the woods. Then another gunshot exploded into the quiet night. Then another. I picked up my pace, trying to duck behind trees whenever I could. The realization dawned on me that I had been walking much longer than it should have taken to get to the cabin. I was lost. For a while, I was using my phone's flashlight, but that drained the battery in no time. It's difficult to put into words how terrifying it is to be lost in the woods at night, with no light source and nothing to protect yourself. Every tree looks the same. Every rock looks the same. Everything looks the same. I don't know how long I stumbled around before I came across a small cabin. There was a large bonfire roaring in the front, with what appeared to be some random junk to fuel it. I was starving, dehydrated, and praying for a working phone inside, because I still had no cell service on my dying phone. The police had to come before it was too late. Inside the cabin, I found the most disturbing menagerie of various types of skulls, bones, and taxidermy I've ever seen. I recall seeing dozens of skulls sitting in various places in the cabin, on tables, shelves mounted to the wall, and on top of the refrigerator and cabinets. Some of those skulls were human. Thinking about those skulls sends chills down my spine. I looked for a phone but didn't see one. I was about to leave when I heard an ATV roaring up the mountainside, heading towards my direction. I ducked down in the space behind the couch and the wall. There wasn't enough time for me to run and not be caught. The ATV slammed to a stop by the cabin. I heard a man mumbling to himself, almost yelling in gibberish. The fire hissed after he struggled with something heavy and threw it on. I have considered trying to sneak by the man while he did whatever he was doing, but I was too scared to move. From where I was hiding, I could look out the tiny front window that faced the fire. I saw the man for the first time. He was a huge man, probably close to 7 feet tall, if not that. He was dragging something toward the fire. It was a body. He was putting bodies on the fire. The fire hissed again as he tossed another onto it. There were 2 more bodies on the back of the ATV. When reality hit me, it instantly sent me into shock. So many memories came flooding back. So much laughter and good times. So many times in my life that I will never get to relive. The bodies were my friends. He was burning my murdered friends. What could I do? How could I intervene and stop him before he burned them all? The shock kept me frozen for a while. When I came to my senses, I looked around the cabin, looking for anything that would help me fight this psycho. My first thought was kitchen knives. With the grace of a cat, I ran toward the kitchen. It took a few guesses to find the right drawer, and I grabbed the biggest knife in there. Exploding out of the front door, I yelled, "Hey, fuckface! What are you doing with my friends?" His head turned like a startled deer.
Huh?
Was all he managed. I rushed at him with what remained of my offensive tackle skills. He flew off his feet and flat on his back. He lay winded on the ground, and I punched his face. "You're dead, fucker!" Bam! I felt a pain scorching up my side, and for a second, I thought I had landed in the fire. I touched the area and pulled back, a handful of blood.
Don't interfere, heathen. I'm going to add you to the offering with your friends.
The madman said while laughing.
I wondered where you went to. Perfect. She told me she needs you. She needs a fresh one. Fresh blood. Fresh, tasty, delicious blood.
She? I asked in my stunned horror.
Yes, my wife. I'm bringing her back. The Dark One told me so. I just need to offer enough blood and bodies and she's mine again. You won't ruin this for me.
He declared, aiming the gun at me again. It clicked, but misfired. He pulled the trigger again, and another misfire. I somehow summoned enough adrenaline after the first try. Then after the second, I had some courage back. I tackled him again, this time sending him straight into the fire. He screamed with the most pained, anguished sound I'd ever heard, and I didn't feel bad about it. That bastard could fry for all I cared. The area was reeking of burned flesh and hair, and I hadn't realized it until the adrenaline started dying off. I was trying not to vomit as I ran over to the ATV. To my dismay, I saw that all their bodies were in the fire. Just a disclaimer, this part of the story is 100% true. I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't delusional from the gunshot wound, blood loss, or the trauma of everything that happened. After I pushed the man into the fire, I looked at it as I got onto the ATV. In the flames, I saw a black shape forming. At first, it was a shapeless mass that began taking shape into a grinning, menacing face. Dirt and rocks flew as I turned the ATV around and back down the path. I wasn't wasting time. It's cliche to say you're running from the devil, but that's how it felt. The hairs on my neck stood on end until I reached the end of the path. It came out near the bottom of the road that led to the cabin. I rushed up to the cabin and saw the front door was wide open. I rushed in, hoping that those bodies were some other people, but nobody was there. Inside, everything was ransacked like the campsite. I dug around in Ron's room to find his keys lying on the dresser. I also noticed that one of Andrew's rifles was missing from the mount in the living room. I grabbed the one that was left, a box of ammo, and made a mad dash for Ron's SUV. It was about 20 miles to the nearest town, and I got there in half the time. A few minutes after I drove away from the cabin, reality started setting in. My friends were dead, and I somehow survived. Then I remembered the blood. The flow had seemed to stop, but my entire side was drenched, and I was starting to feel lightheaded. I burst into tears, barely able to see the road. I was afraid to pull over in fear that the hunter or that face would find me. I'm thankful that I made it to town alive. The police station was easy to find. I stumbled in, and all that I remember saying was, "My friends are dead," and blacked out. When I came out of the haze of unconsciousness, I was in the hospital bed alone. I looked around, hoping to find one of my friends, but nobody was there. I felt a momentary hope that it was all a horrible dream, and that maybe I had suffered a head injury from a car accident. Anything but the horrible truth. The button to summon the nurse was attached to the arm of my bed. She came in, looking relieved, checked my vitals, then called the police. They interviewed me, and I told them everything, minus the demon face in the fire. They eventually told me I wasn't under arrest. After I was discharged 2 days later, they escorted me to the cabin to retrieve my things. They said they never found the hunter, but did find my friends' bodies. And they said escorting me was for my own safety. I thought about that on my way to the cabin. Didn't I tackle him directly into the fire? How did he survive? To this day, the murders remain unsolved. The hunter, as far as anyone knows, has not reemerged. I still have nightmares about that hunter attacking us, about seeing their bodies and their charred remains inside the fire. The vivid sound, smells, the pain, it's all relived every night. There's been one other thing that has been haunting me as well, and it's in the literal sense. It's not my friends or the hunter, but the face. That black, shapeless face in the fire. I see it in random places. I see it in windows, mirrors, TV screens, my cell phone screen, in anything reflective. It torments me, mocking me with that smile and that insidious laugh. Before I begin, I guess I'll tell you about myself first, and maybe that will establish some credibility. My name is Mason, and I'm a 35-year-old third-grade English teacher in the suburbs outside of Columbus, Ohio. As far as I know, I've never had a history of hallucinating, physical or audibly. I've been married once and divorced, and I have no kids. My husky, Dagger, is probably the closest I'll come to having a kid. Now that you know all that, I hope you can view me as an ordinary, sane person, and that the following story isn't a psychotic breakdown. This story will seem hard to believe, but hear me out. This is all true, every word of it. It cost me 2.5 days of sleep, and I'm certain that my mental stability was on the verge of snapping. By the end of this story, you'll probably think I didn't have any mental stability beforehand. Here is a word of caution. Before you play the Blair Witch game, say a prayer, drink holy water, wear rosary beads. I don't know or care, but do something to protect yourself. The Blair Witch is real, and she's in the game. Oh, and all the names of the children mentioned in this story are fake to hide their identities. The game came out on August 30th of this year, but I couldn't buy it until September 6th. After seeing it at E3, I was sucked into the idea of hunting down the Blair Witch in the game. Everybody has seen the movie, so they know the plot, but I'll explain it for the kiddies reading this. In October of 1994, these college students traveled to Burkittsville, Maryland, to learn about the local legend about the Blair Witch. They asked the locals about a hermit that lived in the woods and kidnapped 8 children in the 1940s. The story goes that the hermit killed 7 of those kids as a sacrifice to the Blair Witch. They eventually go into the woods and are never seen again. The kids go missing and the film footage is supposedly found during the search and rescue to locate them. The Blair Witch Project kicked off the found footage film craze in the early 2000s. I won't tell you anything else about it, because if you're too young to have seen it back then, I won't spoil anything else, because you really should watch it. They never actually see the witch, but the cinematography makes you think she's there with them, and some people swear they have caught glimpses of her in various shots. I purchased the game digitally because I didn't feel like waiting for it to come through Amazon Prime. It was a Friday night, and with no other plans, I intended on playing the game until I passed out. After a couple of hours of downloading and about 4 beers, the game was ready, and I dove in. In the game, you play as Ellis, a former cop who brings his German Shepherd Bullet to help him find a missing boy. Over the radio, I heard, 9-year-old Mitchell Jenkins has been missing for 4 days. Police are actively searching for the young boy and are taking volunteers to assist in the search in the Black Hills Forest. It took a few seconds, but I realized something. I have a student in my class named Mitchell Jenkins. Weird, was all I could say. I didn't think too much of it then, so I resumed the game. Ellis guided his Ford Bronco down the road, listening to the radio and eventually turning off into the forest, heading toward the place the police were gathering for the search. There were no police there for the character to talk to, so I did the typical thing in games and started searching the cars for clues. I found a picture of the missing boy and dropped my controller. It was Mitchell, my student, not some imaginary kid created for the game. The resemblance was startling. I had to take out my phone. After spending some time reading various websites that summarized the game's story, none of the websites mentioned the missing boy in the game as being named Mitchell Jenkins, but Peter Shannon. It just didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. The more I read about how Mitchell should not be in the game, the more panic set in. My mind began to calculate how this could be possible. Was it some overly complicated prank? Probably not, but I have a brief idea of what video game programming is like, so this was deduced easily. Was this a glitch in the game? Nothing on the internet mentioned this kind of issue or anything similar. Did my download somehow corrupt? Nothing else seemed to be wrong with the game, so I doubted that. Was it possible for the game to know things about my personal life and incorporate it into the game? This one didn't seem as far-fetched as the rest. We all know that big tech companies track everything we do online, so I thought this possibility was the most logical. Perhaps this was a feature that most people hadn't discovered yet. I decided to keep playing, and I'm glad that I did. I had Ellis and Bullet search the other police cars. We found notes from the police about possible leads and a note from one of his former co-workers that was expecting him. Ellis, I know this is hard for you since Mitchell is one of your students, but try not to let your emotions get the best of you. We are all here with you, all in this together. We will find him and bring him home. The high-pitched shriek of an emergency alert coming from my actual phone startled me. Young male, age 9, named Mitchell Jenkins, missing for 48 hours. He is roughly 4 feet 9 inches in height and 80 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. Please contact local law enforcement if found or if you have any further information. Yep, it's Mitchell, I declared. I wandered through the trees in Black Hills Forest, not finding anything but a few strange animal noises. After what felt like an hour of wandering, I found myself back at the parking spot. Frustration and annoyance at the game for giving me no instructions to go by, other than the clues you find, made me feel exhausted. I looked at my phone at the time. 2:30 a.m. Shit. It was much later than I thought it was. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the burn of sleepiness. After completing my ritual of brushing my teeth and staring at my phone for a while, I drifted off to sleep. I awoke at some point in the middle of the night. I didn't slowly come awake, but within a second, I was fully awake and paralyzed. Nothing would move except my eyes. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I heard something shuffle at the foot of my bed. Why is Dagger acting like that? A blackened hand slapped onto the bed near my left foot, then another by the right. With the speed that seemed in slow motion, I watched a shadowed figure pull itself onto my bed. The weight of the figure on top of me made it difficult to breathe. The panic was flooding throughout me, but my body still did not move. The figure slowly crawled its way up to my face. Then it bent and began whispering into my ear.
I am immortal. You cannot stop me. You cannot save the children. Kill yourself. Kill yourself and avoid the torment to come.
Her breath reeked of rotten decay, making vomit bubble in my throat. In a second, she was gone. My limbs regained movement, and I was able to get off the bed. My sheets and clothes were soaked in sweat. I checked my phone. 3:30 a.m. I decided to shower, trying to rid myself of the stench of that figure's breath. As I was drying off, I felt something burn on my neck. I checked the mirror and saw a burn on my neck in the shape of the human-shaped stick figure from the Blair Witch Project. The cut was red and angry, burning like I had been branded like a cow. That proved to me that all that had happened was real. Those words kept popping into my head as I attempted to go back to sleep. I am immortal. You cannot stop me. You cannot save the children. Kill yourself. Kill yourself and avoid the torment to come. Thoughts of poor little Mitchell, scared and alone, would not leave my head. He was a quiet, loner kid who I sometimes forgot was even there. The type of kid to sit in the corner and read by himself rather than to play with the other kids. Knowing that he was by himself with some psycho that would probably kill him angered me, made me want to hunt the bitch down and kill her. But notice, she said children. There were others. She had more kids to use for her devious desires. The beep of the Xbox turning back on snapped me back to reality. I heard Dagger in the living room, whining like he was scared. I calmed him down by patting him on the head and reassuring him that nothing was wrong. I didn't turn the Xbox on. I don't know if the witch was taunting me or if it was something else nudging me to it. On the couch was my controller, and it was powered off, so that couldn't explain how the Xbox came on. Shrugging it off, I continued the game. Back at the parking lot, I decided to look for clues around the cars again. This time, I found 2 more photos of missing children from the area. Cassandra Holland and Milo Lawrence. 2 more of my students. Cassandra was an outgoing girl with a remarkably high intellect for a 3rd grader, and Milo was a hyper kid with a tendency to be sporadic. From what I could tell, the witch was nabbing kids at random with nothing in common, other than they were all my students. Maybe that was the reason she was specifically targeting them. But why? After searching for more clues in the cars, I found out that all 3 disappeared on the same day. Mitchell's family said he was walking down the block to a friend's house. Cassandra was playing in her fenced-in backyard while her mother was tending to the flowers that lined the house. Cassandra's mother reported that they had a 6-foot privacy fence that would be difficult for an adult to jump, let alone a child. Milo's family said that he was packing his bags to stay with his grandparents for the weekend when he just vanished from his bedroom. Milo's parents reported no windows were open, and it was a straight drop from the second floor to the ground, so it seemed unlikely. I just shook my head because I knew why. A question popped into my head. Were they trapped in the game? Had the witch somehow made her way into the virtual world of the internet to steal kids? Was that even possible? If she were in there, that would mean she would have access to millions of people that would buy the game. I had to stop her. Back in the game, I started traveling in the opposite direction that I began. Bullet, the main character's German Shepherd, started going crazy and running toward an area directly ahead of us. In the brush, he led me to a pair of sneakers. I checked the reports for each kid, and these belonged to Mitchell. He took off again, and a few yards later, he found a dirty baseball cap that belonged to Milo. Not much further was a jacket that was Cassandra's. It was strange that these were all leading in a straight line. Common sense tells you that it's a trap, but I assumed it was part of the plot, so I kept going. Up ahead, I found an old, rotted cabin located in the middle of a clearing. I could hear voices, but they were too far to decipher. Bullet took off as soon as we got into the clearing, charging straight into the old cabin. I ran over there, finding Bullet licking the faces of 3 happy, disheveled kids. None of them would speak. They just stared at me. But the way they stared looked as if they were looking through me, not at me. It took a few moments to look through their dirty, matted states to determine that they were my students. They all sat in a circle on the floor, looking in my direction but not blinking or even moving. "Kids, you okay? You've had everyone worried. I think it's time to go home." "Kids?" Not one of them responded or even flinched. I watched them for a few minutes, noticing that they didn't even blink. "Okay, kids, it's time we head back now." They cut me off. Their mouths opened in an expression of terror, but they didn't make a sound. Their little hands lifted, index fingers extended, pointing directly behind me. A chill crawled up my neck, goosebumps upon the overwhelming animalistic sense of fear that swarmed my mind. A cutscene started. Ellis turned, the witch floating a few feet above the ground, her black gown flowing in the ethereal wind that I couldn't feel. Her face was obscured by a long, black hood. She pointed back, cackling. Bullet ran at her, but he collapsed to the ground with a pained scream.
"Come, my children. Come to me. It's time we go home."
Ellis screamed, "No!" and rushed the witch. After a few steps, he stopped in his tracks and collapsed, gasping for air. He clawed at some unseen hand that was trying to choke the life from him. Bullet was by his side, licking his face, confused at his master's pain. As he thrashed about, a crucifix he wore around his neck fell out of his shirt. The witch hissed in pain and relinquished her grip on Ellis. Ellis led the kids back to the car with Bullet on guard. All the cops who were there have now disappeared. He loaded them into his Bronco and climbed into one of the police cars. Finding a radio, he keyed up. "All units, this is Ellis Lynch. I have located all the missing children. They need medical attention. Anybody there?" After a few agonizing moments, an answer came back.
We read you, Ellis. Are you in the parking lot at the entrance of the Black Hills Forest?
10-4. I will have them in my Bronco waiting for EMS. The credits began to roll. An ambulance arrives and examines the children. Ellis walks by himself to the edge of the parking lot, staring into the thick forest. Something catches his eye. The witch stood on the ground between some trees.
"I'm not done with you yet."
The credits keep rolling as the game ended. I looked at my phone. 1 p.m. I hadn't slept in 29 hours. The exhaustion hit me then. I climbed into bed and dreamed the worst dream I have ever endured. The kids are all fine. They were discovered in the woods outside the town just hours after I finished the game. They were scared and, from what I was told, had no idea how they got there. The police have stated that they are still investigating if there is a suspect in their disappearances. Since then, I have been awakened repeatedly every night, dreaming that she is standing beside my bed and whispering threats. I also wake up with scratches, always in threes, on random places on my body. Dagger, my husky, won't come in my room at night anymore. The closest he will get is to the front of the door. I decided to write this as a warning to everyone. The witch told me her plans for what she wants to use the game for. She said she is going to keep taking kids, and if you don't succeed in the game, they will never be returned, and she will become increasingly powerful. After that, I don't know. But for the love of everything holy, don't play the new Blair Witch game. I put my ticket into the kiosk and made my way to the train steps. It was a bitter cold that day. Record-setting, in fact. I bundled up tight in my knit scarf, extra insulated coat I had bought the day before, and my extra insulated gloves. The inside was cozy and warm, so I didn't hesitate to remove the thick clothing. I was running. I didn't have a car and couldn't afford a plane ticket. The train was the fastest, cheapest thing I could afford then. What was I running from? Outside the train window, I saw him. The faceless man in the wide-brimmed hat and overcoat. He always hides in the shadows, and right then, he was lurking from behind the large beam that supported the roof of the station. What does he want? I have no idea. But he is always waving, beckoning me to come with him. I really don't want to know where. I usually spend every New Year's celebration at home with a bottle of liquor as my only dependable company. Last year, I was doing just that while binge-watching Supernatural. I remember checking my phone to see what time it was. 11:57 p.m. By then, my vision was blurring. I was well on my way to my tradition of getting shit-faced for New Year's. My family had told me for years that they were concerned. They said I spent too much time alone and that I needed to get out and do something. Suicide had come to mind numerous times over the years due to the shit that life throws your way. Multiple failed relationships, jobs that went nowhere, and possibility of good things that just blew up in your face. It all takes a toll on your mental health after time. Last year was no exception. I found out a few months before that my girlfriend had cheated on me multiple times and had also told other people about it. Oh, and she also thought it was particularly hilarious, making crude remarks like, He's so stupid that he can't even tell what's going on. I drank more. It was out of the corner of my blurry vision that I saw a black figure standing by my door. I tried to focus, but I was too deep in the bottle to do that. I just saw this out of focus, black, human-shaped thing.
Do it. You know that you want to. You know that none of this is worth it. You know life is pointless, and that none of this matters. Why not do it? Nobody loves you. Nobody cares about you. Not even Carrie. She never loved you. Never cared about you, and you're just going to repeat the same mistakes for the rest of your life. So why bother?
The voice that said this was deep and gravelly, sounding a bit distant, like a radio station on the verge of cutting off. While the voice spoke, I felt the energy drain from me, and paralysis set in. I can remember mumbling back, "Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter. I should just kill myself and end it."
How about a knife? That one in the corner over there. It looks sharp enough and should end your pathetic life in no time.
"Yes," I replied. At this point, I felt like I was in a dream and that I had no control over my actions. I shuffled into the kitchen, grabbed the knife, and plunged it into my wrist. I woke up in the hospital. My friend Colin had come over. Because he had a key, he was able to get in. He found me on the kitchen floor in a puddle of blood. He was a night shift nurse at the nearby hospital, and his quick thinking saved my life. I was later admitted to the psych ward, with my cooperation. I thought I had gone completely mental. They diagnosed me with having schizoaffective disorder with severe depression. I spent the next 2 months rebuilding myself mentally and came out feeling reinvigorated. It was around Halloween when I was browsing around Reddit and found a post called, "What is the creepiest phenomenon with no explanation?" I am very much into the supernatural and believe in most spiritual beliefs about the afterlife, demons, and ghosts, but I'm not religious. I saw a reply to the post with a link that said, "How about the mass amount of people that commit suicide on New Year's, and the survivors claim they see a tall, black figure telling them to do it? Here's a link for proof of the phenomenon." Chills covered my body, and I felt my muscles twitch. The memory of the events of that night came back. The black figure, the commands it gave, the way it wanted me to kill myself or sacrifice myself. I posed this question to the post. "What does it want?" Someone replied, "Well, from what I gather, it's been talked about for centuries amongst various cultures in one form or another. An otherworldly spirit that comes back once a year to gather enough souls to fill itself for another year. Like a soul-eating bear back to hibernation." This was when I went down the rabbit hole on Google and researched more of this thing. About 25 pages back, I found a result that was close to what I was looking for. It was an independent paranormal research group's website, which I will keep anonymous, and the article answered many questions that I had. The earliest mention went back to Roman times, and it was simply referred to as tenebris, written as a name, not a description, and tenebris, translated from Latin, means darkness. Tenebris was said to appear at winter solstice and once convinced an entire legion, which I found out was 5,000 legionnaires, to rush off a high cliff while they were pursuing a Germanic army, and nearly all of them had died. Julius Caesar found out and demanded a mass sacrifice back in Rome, written by him as to appease the beast Tenebris. A few days later, I went back to the Reddit post and saw dozens of people who had commented, saying they had seen Tenebris. I messaged a few of them and we started a group chat on Discord. The number grew to over 250 by December 1st, and we all had a similar experience. One guy was walking on the sidewalk in New York City when he saw a figure in the alleyway and the overwhelming urge to leap in front of a taxi, but was able to fight it off. Another man was on a cruise ship and saw a dark figure in the water, demanding that he jump overboard with it, which he also did. He said he had 1 foot over the rails when an attendant grabbed him seconds before he could leap. A woman, who was suffering from a heroin addiction, was nearly coaxed into taking a lethal dose by a shadow man. They all sound a little similar, right? I have no idea what to do about it, but this is real. I've seen it, and I'm terrified it will come back this New Year's. It's a few days before New Year's, and I'm already starting to feel it. I haven't moved from this couch in days, and there's plenty of alcohol. It usually hits hard this time of year, as it is just a reminder of how lonely I am. Colin is out of state with his family this year, and the rest of my friends are also preoccupied. So much for that. I guess I will sulk around my apartment. You know, to keep the tradition alive. It's been a couple days since I wrote the rest of this. I've seen it a few times, lurking in the corners, hiding from the light. It's waiting. It will pounce once the time is right, when it is at full power. I know it will try to take me again, but hopefully, I don't listen to Tenebris this year. I sat by the fire, trying to keep my hands from freezing. The bitter winds were blowing through the cracks in the old cabin, and you could feel frost building up around the windows. I picked the wrong damn time to go there, that's for sure. The logs cracked and popped as I prayed the small stack of wood would last me until the storm died down. Beside of me, the fire glowed off the paled skin of her corpse. Her meat cooked well on the fire, and thankfully, I had plenty more left to keep me alive. She was a dumb, loud-mouthed bitch. She ran that mouth up until I planted the hatchet into her thick skull. She kept yelling and thrashing around while I dragged her up the mountainside to my favorite kill spot. God, it was so satisfying to shut that trap of hers. Her body flopped to the ground, then rolled around a bit, like they normally do from a swift blow to the head. I normally don't like that because of the mess, but what the fuck? The messier it was, the more satisfying it was to shut her up. It had been a while since I'd killed, and I had to rid myself of the itch. I brought her up to my cabin so I could feast in peace and quiet for a weekend, and because the cabin was about a mile away from the kill spot. The wind was fierce, sometimes blowing hard enough to rattle the entire cabin. Occasionally, I could swear I could hear her words coming from the wind. At first, I thought it was the isolation and my stupid brain picking up words out of silence, but it became increasingly obvious. At first, it was only whispers, but once the wind picked up, it became louder.
Frank.
It would say, droning out each word, almost as if it were moaning. The harder the wind whipped, the louder the words were.
Don't you remember us, Frank? Don't you remember us?
Maybe I was going insane, I thought. Maybe I had finally grown a conscience and felt bad for what I had done. Nah, never. I was just going fucking insane finally. I knew it would happen someday. Remember what? I answered back. Yep, I had finally gone totally fucking crazy.
Remember killing us, Frank? I'm sure you do. I'm sure you see in the sensual climax you get when you cut our throats, bashed our heads in, and shot us in the deep forest while you fondled yourself over our corpses. That, I'm sure you can remember well.
Sure do. What do you want?
We're coming for you, Frank.
Yeah, I'll admit it. I panicked. I got up and ran over to my backpack and found my .45. In a frantic mess, I waved it around. Show your fucking self! Come on! I'm not afraid of you! Who's out there? Why are you fucking with me?
We're not here yet, Frank. But we will be. It won't be long.
The voice said, as it trailed off in laughter.
No.
Laughter that sounded like a crowd laughing in unison.
Fuck this.
I ran into the master bedroom and locked the door with an old iron key that came with the place. Nothing was to come into the room and make it out in one piece. The dresser was nearby, so I shoved it in front of the door. Keep in mind, I haven't had proper military training or anything, so I cowered in the corner with my pistol pointed at the door. It wasn't long before the door started rattling.
Frank.
The voice behind the door calmed as it fumbled with the doorknob. Now I could tell that it was the voice of a woman. The voice sounded familiar.
Do you remember my voice, Frank? My body is in front of the fireplace. Sure you can remember as I screamed at the top of my lungs as you dragged me by my hair through the mud and rocks up the path. You remember taking me to the spot miles into the woods, far away from prying eyes or ears that could hear me scream for help.
It started ramming the door, the dresser bulging just slightly at each thump.
Frank, no matter what you do, we will get you. All of us, we are all here. Nothing will stop us from seeking our revenge from what you did to us.
The voice informed me as it kept ramming the door. The thing behind the door stopped, then gave one great heave, shoving the door wide open, and the dresser flew across the room into the wall, leaving a hole where it hit. In the doorway stood the partially eaten corpse of the woman I had killed earlier that day. Behind her stood several other mangled corpses, all ranging from slightly decomposed to I don't know how they were able to walk, rotten. The stench hit me then also, the gut-churning stench of rotten meat. At once, they all spoke.
We told you we were coming, Frank. Now it's time to pay. It's time to atone for all your sins.
The ones who could run did. The others who were barely put together just shuffled as fast as they could, but they were on me in no time. I watched as they chewed and pulled at my flesh, felt them devour my innards and my meat, heard them moan with intense pleasure as the taste of my body touched their hungry palates. That was the last thing I remember. I woke up in a hospital bed, my arm handcuffed to the bed. An officer was sitting next to my bed, and when he saw I was awake, he stood up.
Mr. Frank Russo, you're under arrest for the murders of 9 women.
What? What are you talking about? How did I get here?
I'm not surprised you don't remember. A park ranger found you passed out in the snow, nearly froze to death. They found a note in your hand, a handwritten confession to everything you had done.
I sighed.
They got their revenge, all right.
What was that?
Nothing. Take me in. I'll confess. I'll tell you everything.
After the doctor cleared me to leave, they took me to the station. I told them everything. It was time to atone for everything I had done. After I was finished, the officer taking notes looked up at me.
Is that all? Well, as I was passed out in the snow, I had a dream that came back to life and ate me. Funny shit, right? I guess I do have a conscience.
The officer stared at me with confusion.
Mr. Russo, you do know that we found bite marks all over your body. The doctors have been wondering how you got that many, but we paid little attention to it.
I paused, lifting my shirt. They were all over my stomach and chest. Bite marks. Human bite marks. They weren't very deep, like something a toddler would do. I screamed.
What the fuck? That's exactly what we were wondering,
the officer said as he took a sip from his coffee.
One more thing. Did you find someone in your cabin? We found this huge hole in the wall from what appears to have been a dresser thrown into it, Mr. Russo.
I fainted. Here I am, sitting on this bunk, writing all this down to keep myself sane, to remind myself that it did happen to me. I still dream about them sometimes. They haven't left me alone either. They come back, almost every night, either in my dreams or they wake me up from my slumber, reenacting what I did to each of them, reminding me of the pain and suffering they endured at my hands. And the worst part, they always tell me they are still hungry.
I could see exactly where I needed to go. That night was cold. The sticky after-storm air clung to me like a wet rag, and the fog was starting to rise. Behind me, I could hear the unmistakable sound of feet pounding on the pavement and the deep, winded breathing of a desperate charge. He was surprisingly fast, but I was faster and more desperate. He was an out-of-shape, overweight, middle-aged man, and I was none of those things. By then, he had been chasing me for about a mile through rugged woods. I also doubted he could breathe very well through the modified pillowcase draped over his head. His eyes were probably bulging from exhaustion through the holes in the fabric. I hoped he would just keel over, dead from a massive heart attack. But luck wasn't on my side yet. I sprinted across the 2-lane road toward a community that I could see from that hill over the tree line below. My leggings were in tatters from foliage grabbing onto my clothes. My shoes had been long missing, and I had stripped my muddy socks off probably a mile ago. My bare feet were aching and probably bleeding from running across forest debris and gravel, but I persevered. I didn't care about the pain. My life depended on escaping from this psychotic man. No matter what, he wasn't going to win. I was. He had been driving for hours with me tied up in the trunk, but I was carefully sawing at the extension cord to use for rope with a pocket knife. The trunk was completely dark, so I had to navigate only by touch. The trunk had a pungent, metallic odor that I realized was the smell of old, dried blood. There was also a small leak in the trunk, which happened to be dripping on my head, adding to the torture of this hell. The car was ancient, so it didn't have an escape button or hatch from the trunk. After what seemed like hours, the car had suddenly come to a stop. I heard the door slam shut, and then heard his feet crunching on gravel as he marched toward the rear. The trunk popped open to reveal dusk had come, and that the pillowcase psycho was back.
Well, hello, beautiful. I just had to stop and get one last look.
From hours of seething anger and the primal urge to survive, I leaped from the trunk, lunging for his face with that pocket knife. His eye popped like a grape, exactly where I was aiming. Blood immediately began gushing from the wound. His face twisted in agony as he screamed a guttural roar of pain and fell to his knees. I thought about stabbing him again, or trying to beat the shit out of him. But last second, I decided he would probably win that battle. Every hour of jogging and running in the mornings had prepared me for this moment. Not knowing how much time that had given me, I sprinted for the woods. He soon followed. Hours later, I was sprinting for an unknown town through a patch of dense woods long before sunrise. It was nearly pitch black, except for what little moonlight was peeking between the clouds. Earlier that day, it had rained. Before all this chaos, I hadn't even considered how the rain could be a curse. The mud in this part of the woods was becoming thicker and deeper with every step. It soon became obvious that I had entered a swamp. Soon, I was up to my knees in water, then my waist. It had been a while since I'd seen or heard the man behind me. I hoped and I prayed that he had given up on his pursuit. Thoughts began to form about what I would do when I finally made it to the town. Would I run to a house and bang on the front door, hoping that someone would answer? In the trunk, I discovered that he had taken my cell phone, my wallet, and my keys, but he hadn't checked my jacket pocket, where he would have found that pocket knife. Now, it was my sole possession. I was swimming at this point. The water smelled putrid and dank, filling my nostrils with that gassy, unmistakable smell of a swamp. After calming myself and building up the nerve, I checked around again and did not see the man. He was gone. My spirits lifted, and I chuckled with glee. That morning had started like any other. I'd wake up around sunrise, jog for a mile, shower, then I'd stop at Dunkin' and get an iced coffee before going to work. But something went horribly wrong this time. As I was jogging past a nearby park, I heard a car stop behind me down the block. The door opened, and I could hear someone get out. This happens occasionally, and I usually tried to just ignore people. But this time, something didn't feel right, and I'd soon find out why. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up in the front seat of a car, my body giving me obvious signs that I had been sexually assaulted, and I won't give you the vivid details. The back of my head was drenched in dried blood, along with a pounding headache. The car reeked of cigarettes, and the old upholstery was cracked in a million places. The man who owned this clearly didn't care much about it. I looked around to see if I could spot him. The car was parked in the woods somewhere. The car was parked by a very old camper, looking as if it were older than my dad. The only path out was a set of ruts in the ground that led to what I assume was this horrible man's house. Not seeing the man, I decided to get out of the car and hastily make my way down this path and see where it took me. My leggings had been ripped open at the crotch, and my knees were torn open from me falling to the ground. The cold morning air really reminded me of all this. After making it to the top of a hill, I could see that the path led to a winding 2-lane road, but I couldn't tell where I was. That's when I heard feet pounding up the path behind me. I could see the man charging at me like a bull. The pillowcase over his head topped a large, hefty body that was capable of surprising speed. I bolted, praying that my morning jogs would give me the endurance beyond his. The next thing I remember is waking up in his trunk, tied up like a hog, heading out to be slaughtered. The water had become shallower after a few minutes. I examined myself and found that my body was covered in algae, mud, and reeked of that awful smell. I trudged through the mud once again. The moon had completely been obscured by the clouds. It was so dark that I had to feel my way through the woods, making me move very slowly and carefully now. I could see the lights of the town through the foliage, partially guiding my way. I was almost running, but still trying to be careful. Lining the road to the town was some very thick foliage, so thick that the lights could barely peek through. I was making my way past them. Suddenly, I felt ill. I had fallen into a ditch covered by those plants. My knee had snapped, and my ankle rolled. The fire-hot pain shooting all through my body. Even the smallest twitch set it off. I was writhing, screaming out in agony when I saw a car coming.
Hey!
I shouted,
Stop! Please help!
waving my arms frantically while trying to bite back the pain. The car slowed and pulled to the curb nearby. I couldn't see the person because their brights were blinding me. I raised my arm to shield my eyes. Through the radiance, I could see a figure coming my way. It was him. The pillowcase was once again pulled over his head. I noticed a blood stain streaming from the gaping wound where his eye had once been. His other eye glaring at me with white-hot anger through the hole he cut in the fabric.
I got you now, bitch.
He was gripping a tire iron.
You're gonna pay for my eye.
He barked through gritted teeth. What was I going to do against this gigantic man wielding a tire iron? He took a long, arching swing at me. I rolled. His weapon struck the ground with a ringing thud. Pocket knife in hand, I swung for his neck. I missed my intended mark and stabbed him in the back of his right ear. He bellowed in pain, grabbing for the wound, blood squirting out between his fingers.
Fucking bitch!
He swung again, connecting with my right shoulder. More pain, more ways to slow me down. The man wrestled me to the ground, trying to force his knife from my hand. My teeth crunched into the bones of his hand as hard as I could. The taste of his blood poured over my teeth, making me nauseous. He bellowed again. This time, though, I took the opportunity to snatch the tire iron away from him and struck the top of his head with as much force as I could. He went out immediately, dropping to the ground. I yanked the pillowcase off in a fury and had the knife in my hand. I don't know why I wanted to see his face, but when it happened, something triggered deep down inside. All the memories of everything he did to me, the faces he probably made while he had his way with my unconscious body, the sheer ugliness of this awful man made me snap. Something primal took over then. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but the memories of what he had done to me and what he had probably planned to do just made me erupt in a blind rage. I gripped that tire iron so hard that my knuckles went white. I bashed his face so many times that it barely looked human by the time my rage was satisfied. His crooked teeth were now either fragmented or gone. His fat tomato nose was flattened into a mushy wound, and both the eyes were popped now. His ugly, acne-scarred face now bruised, busted open and swollen. If he did manage to wake up, well, he'd be in for an even rougher time. I felt happy about it, and I'm still not sure how to process that. Should I be proud? Should I be ashamed? Or should I be afraid? I needed to get out of there in case he did wake up. I searched through his pockets and found his car keys. I decided to also snatch his wallet so I could identify him. I found something else too that baffled me. In the same pocket as his wallet, I found what appeared to be a chunk of my hair. I felt around my head and realized that it was. After some immense pain and effort, I managed to drag my useless leg over to the car and hauled myself into the driver's seat. The car rumbled to life, much to my joy. I turned the car around and drove. Luckily, I had injured my left leg, and that was an automatic shifter. This town was unknown to me, but I drove around until I found an officer. He tried to calm me down, but the words poured out of my mouth in such a fury that it just sounded like babbling. I must have been a sight with mud and algae up to my stomach, clothes shredded, no shoes or socks, twigs in my hair, and the stink of swamp. He took me down to the station and brought me a cup of coffee and a blanket. The officer did his best to calm me down, and after a while, I managed to tell him the story. I remember thinking about how many showers it would take to not only clean off the swamp gunk, but to clean myself of the filthy memories from that evening. The police found him still unconscious by that ditch. He confessed to my assault and 3 murders, but DNA testing later pinpointed him to 12 others, all of them around my age and looking striking like me. In his home, they found boxes of demented memorabilia, like their underwear. He also collected snippets of their hair that he kept in the drawer next to his bed. You can probably guess why. What did I learn from all this? When I got home, I showered 4 times that day. I did this for days, never really feeling clean again. After the ordeal with the man, I never leave the house without my pistol, a can of mace on my keychain, and an overly paranoid vigilance of those around me. Sometimes, I feel eyes watching me from behind, and I walk a little faster. I also bought a house and raised a German Shepherd puppy that I named Walter, who now joins me on my morning jogs. All these things combined still don't make me feel completely safe. Then, there are also the nightmares, in which he brutalizes me and finally kills me. There's no escape from those. Therapy helps, but how can you escape your own subconscious thoughts? But the only thing I really learned is that the worst kind of monsters aren't imaginary creatures in movies or books. They're other human beings. Sometimes, the worst people can bring the monster out of you too.
There are stories as old as humanity about strange beings that appear out of nowhere, that come to warn you of terrible things in the future. Traditionally, these things are called omens. Black cats, white dogs, banshees, etc. Modern science can tell you that there is no credence to these and there are no facts to base these claims. In 1968, not long before his passing, the town hired a man to record the story told by my great-great-grandfather, Cristiano Brivio. I'm writing down his recollection of my own town's most infamous stories. The Tale of Bright Eyes, and including bits of my own research into this strange, terrifying tale.
It was the year 1908. I had just arrived from New York City to the town of Coburg, Pennsylvania. As a young 18-year-old man, I was excited to start my fresh life in New York City. When I arrived, however, there were men at the docks recruiting workers for various coal companies along the Appalachians. The man who recruited us surprised us by speaking particularly good Italian, and we were drawn in by his promises of decent wages and a place to live. At the time, much like today, coal was the main source of income for most of the Appalachian region, especially southern Pennsylvania, and it was a booming industry. Little did we know that a war was looming, and the demand would increase even more. My brother and I couldn't speak English then, so we felt alone with the other men that
Here, my grandfather's words were lost in a fit of wheezing coughs that came so hard he almost couldn't catch his breath. Black lung had been devouring him for years at this point, and would eventually take his life less than a year later.
Are you okay, sir?
The man recording asked.
Yes, I'm fine. I'll just drink some water and I'll be fine.
He took a few gulps.
That's better. Now, in my time, men worked hard for little pay and worked long hours to keep their families fed. We knew it was dangerous work, but our choices were either to suffer a bit and fill our bellies or face the torture of starvation. Yes, I admit I witnessed Bright Eyes myself in the fall of that year.
He said as he began to cough violently again.
Sir, are you sure you want to do this? You don't have to.
I want people to know that we weren't delusional or just seeing things. It really happened. We're not liars. I don't care if it ruins my reputation. I don't have long on this earth anyways, so my reputation means little to me now.
Okay, we'll continue when you're feeling better. I will pause the recording until then.
It continued with a click.
The evening shift was preparing to go inside, waiting for day shift to come out of mine number 4. When we all heard this ungodly scream come from the forest, some of the men ignored it, thinking it was a wolf or a mountain lion, started to head inside. We heard a loud ruckus coming from the forest, like a herd of buffaloes that was charging at us. We stood there startled, as we saw this enormous, cat-like beast burst forth from the dark forest and slowly trot its way inside the entrance of mine number 4. It walked like, what's the term, like it owned the place. It was as if it were taunting us to do something to it.
He coughed lightly this time and kept his composure.
I was the first to spot it coming from the woods, but since my English was terrible, I couldn't find the words to alert the rest of the men. All of us told the investigators the same details. That its body was at least 12 feet long. It had the whitest fur we had ever seen on a living creature, like it was pure snow. And it had these enormous bright eyes, like the headlights of a car. Its body was long and slender, like a panther, but bulky and muscular like a tiger. 2 long fangs hung over its bottom lip, going about 6 inches below its jaw. There is no animal on Earth that looks anything like that beast, not even close. When the beast went inside,
he said,
the roof collapsed in one of the sections, and 22 men were killed, including my brother, Al. God rest his soul. None of us saw it come back out. After the incident, we took to calling the thing Bright Eyes. All of us men who had reported to have seen Bright Eyes were dismissed as being hysterical from the accident, like those who would later go on to fight in the Great War. none of us were taken seriously. We were examined by numerous medical doctors, but no shrinks. Psychiatry was still a new thing, so nobody considered it. We were just dismissed as crazies. Police investigators questioned us, but they waited for the results from the doctors. We didn't hear from them about the incident after that. But it happened a second time a few months later. At mine number 2 this time. The beast started out of the woods after a long howling scream. It looked into the mine and boom! 12 men dead from another roof collapse. Those men told the same tales as we had, so the mine owners started listening. They hired these 2 local drunks to find the beast and kill it. I believe the 2 men were named John Fink and Henry Irving. They were notoriously unreliable workers, so I think the mine owners only hired them because they were dumb enough to do it. We all told them whereabout we thought the beast emerged from, so they searched the area and came back a few hours later. They claimed they found a trail that led up to the creature's lair. They said they were going to camp around the lair, wait for the beast to come out, and fill it with shotgun slugs. Only, that's not how things turned out. The next afternoon, after a few hours passed when they were supposed to report in, the bosses sent out a search party. They were found sitting back to back between some trees, clutching their rifles to their chests, and their hair was completely bleached white. The rumor around town was that they were shipped off to an asylum after raving about a creature with glowing eyes that was going to come after them. To hear John and Henry tell it, they said that they had spent the night getting drunk off some whiskey they decided to bring along, and wound up passed out in their tent. As they slept in their drunken slumber, the beast came up to the tent they were staying in, yanked it off the ground with its teeth, and stared at them for a while. And that was all they could remember. I don't know if any of that is true, but I never saw them after that. A couple of men who found them said that their hair was, indeed, white as snow.
Upon further research, I did find out that these men had lived in the town and that they mysteriously disappeared around the time of the mine accidents. I couldn't confirm if they had gone to an asylum and found no evidence of their hair turning white, but Grandpa Chris insisted it was all real. He goes on.
After the second appearance of Bright Eyes, the bosses hired a security company called Watson and Pickett to guard the workers. They sent 10 armed men per shift to stand around the entrance and were told to shoot any strange-looking animals that approached the mine. The final time Bright Eyes came, the guards saw it coming. They waited for it to come within range and opened fire with their rifles. Keep in mind, some of these guys fought in the Spanish-American War or had some kind of military training, so they were good shots. The beast continued walking as if the bullets hadn't touched its flesh. They appeared to just go right through it. The guards stood in amazement as it walked by them, unwounded. 2 of them tried to block it from going inside, firing at close range or at point-blank range. But it simply gave an ear-screeching roar, and the men ran in fear. Before it went inside mine number 1, it turned and looked at the men, giving one final ear-piercing scream. It strutted inside, not seeming to care we were all standing close by. There was an explosion this time, killing 33 men, almost the entire shift. After that, they closed all the mines in our town, and we all started traveling a little further to the next town over for work.
I decided for the sake of the story that I would do my own investigation. I traveled to the town, now a brimming miniature city, complete with its own Walmart. The area where the abandoned mines were had gone untouched for all this time that had passed. I traced the area where my grandpa had seen the creature and scouted the area for clues. The mines were sealed, and the one that had exploded had a plaque embedded into the concrete seal commemorating the disaster and the dead men. I searched the area, looking for proof of bright eyes. I didn't find anything substantial then. The mountain is vast, and I found an old trail that went around it, where I found an opening in the mountainside. As I approached the entrance, I heard a loud, ear-piercing scream. Inside the cave, I could see something glowing very faintly near the distant rear. I didn't stay there long. The place just gave me creeps. The trail back down the hill was worn, well-traveled, but I stumbled a few times. My knees slammed into the rocky soil, sending a shock of pain up my legs, but I scrambled to my feet and kept on as the blood trickled down my shins. I was almost to the bottom when something tackled me from behind. In my ear, hot breath steamed from a warm, wet nose of some large animal. I could hear its sticky lips part as it sniffed my hair and my flesh, maybe surveying me for weakness. The warm, barbed tongue of the creature lapped across my neck and the back of my head, perhaps to see if I was a worthwhile meal. The creature decided I wasn't satisfactory and it moved off of me. I rolled over to make sure it was leaving and not simply waiting for me to get up before it attacked. I watched as this huge white cat hiked its way up the hill back to its lair in the cave I had just left. As the creature entered the cave, from behind me, several hundred feet away, a huge part of the mountain gave way.